All right, hello everyone, and thank you for coming back for the report back section. For those of you who are reporters from your group, can you please raise your hand down at the bottom of the screen, and the ePoster Boards crew will pull you up on stage. As a reminder, there's no screen share, but we'll just have you report back what you discussed in your smaller groups. All right. Tom got here just ahead of Tanya, so Tom, go ahead.
Tanya was just going to tell me which town in Louisiana she grew up in, but when we got cut off. So.
At the same table, I didn't know we were both reporters, but I'll mute myself and turn my camera off. So,
Beth, so I'm Tom Ferris from Rutgers. I presented yesterday, and my colleague Mike Brown presented this morning. I was at table 2. We had, while I missed it, we had quite a bit of conversation on this mention of the military academies and the promotion process in the academies. And the primary point there was there's lots of information that gets provided. You have to be physically in shape. You get lots of reports from superiors through the years, and much of the information is subjective. It's broad and deep, but it's subjective, and so the evaluators have lots of training on how to process that information, and because it's reasonably high stakes. And I think we all have the experience of meeting someone who's done extremely well in the military, and telling their life story that they really wouldn't have had a chance without the academy appointment. Right? So it's very high stakes, but a lot of training goes into that evaluation. And then we had a lot of conversation about the notion of AI and machine learning in the admissions process. Right? So one of our experiences at Rutgers, and this was from just before the pandemic, and I'm sure many of my colleagues at other universities have a similar experience of commercial entities coming to your university to sell a product. And one of the things they're selling is quite fine. It is back to you information about the high schools you have had success with, right? And the zip codes that you will likely have success with. That's fine, but if we haven't been to a high school before, they're not going to point us to the high school that we didn't go to before. So that's contrasted to the very nice presentation from the University of Michigan and this whole notion of the adversity index, and making sure we're considering how adverse the situation that some students are coming from, and in our case with Mike Brown and his staff, he actually does interviews to try to evaluate the leadership potential of students coming from adverse situations. So I don't know if anyone, if Bob or Teresa from my table wants to add, or Diane wants to add, but that's what we talked about.
Great, thank you. And if anyone does, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And well, Teresa said you did a great job.
She's a fellow Texan in part, so.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. And Tanya, if you want to report back from the other table.
yeah, so we had a very rich conversation about these questions, and thank you to some folks at the table who taught me how to clip the notes from the whiteboard and upload them and download them so I could actually have that in my notes. And so some of the barriers that we identify and implementing the practices that we've heard today had to do with actually gathering the data. And then how do you create and maintain an asset-based framework in admitting students into an alternate engineering track? Who gets to make the decisions? Engineering faculty, staff, admissions, department heads, et cetera. And then overcoming biases and assumptions about ability. And so those were some of the things that were written down on our whiteboard. But then we talked about how do we change the mindset of the college about who belongs in engineering. And you're smiling because you know that continues to be a long, rooted issue in our industry. And it's rooted in the traditions of engineering and STEM, right? And so we have a lot of folks in our colleges that are resistant to change. And we specifically talked about, I asked the question, well, are faculty really ready to change and embrace students in the field? And so then we got into the discussion of, well, then how are faculty rewarded and incentivized? And so that was one of the topics we had on how would we overcome the barriers, not just incentivizing them, but holding them accountable to make the changes that's necessary for us to be more inclusive as in engineering and actually in all STEM fields. We also talked about adopting and creating a culture of using high impact practices that we know is really beneficial into students participating. And what we talked about also was welcoming folks to the campus, getting to know student names. And I think we fall into this trap of, oh, there's so many of them. Well, guess what? There's so many of us too, right? And so how do we organize ourselves into groups so that we could be a resource for students who are coming in, especially when you think of students who've never been at a university, right? They're the first in their family. Some students are, I don't know if you all know, but I know for us in working in the Gold Shirt program, there were students who were first in their family to graduate high school. And then they're the first to come to college, and then they're the first to go into engineering. And so that is a really heavy lift. And so we want to know students' names and a little bit about them and invest a little bit more in making sure we remove this, the barrier of getting to know students. And like we talked about the students, the faculty and mindset and elitism, that we also have our students who also have, an air of arrogance around being superior to other students. And we talked about this, oh, well, this major is harder to get in than this one. This is an easy engineering major. And there's that, oh, well, we're better than you because we're this major and you're that major. And that we need to, disrupt that hierarchy of disciplines and, not allow the students to take those kinds of narratives to heart and share that. And then there was a question about tracking data through graduation. We've admitted them, but are we tracking? And we talked about all of the data from our individual universities, and then nationally, how ASWE tracks data for those colleges that are participating in that research or in capturing the data. The commitment to invest. Let's see. Okay, and so I guess I'll go on to where should future research admissions focus? And we had a few ideas about the interplay between admissions and financial aid and scholarships and retention and graduation outcomes. Because if you're bringing in students from low income backgrounds or socioeconomically maybe disadvantaged, how does admitting them and financial aid play into their ability to stay and graduate? And then I talked about the beliefs and assumptions about ability, elitism, and hierarchy and privilege associated with honors. Because tiniest personal opinion, if you're an engineering student, you're an honor student. So why do we have these engineering honors programs that may be providing this wedge and barrier amongst the student body? And then Pre-engineering, trying to do some research on pre-engineering programs and whether they are successful. And then the research on offering students alternative college major options if they are not directly admissible to engineering. And then knowing what part of a holistic review process are most important for predicting success for underrepresented and under-resourced students. Competitive admissions majors, oh, I already talked about that one. And let's see if I had anything else. And we talked about wanting to understand what were the predictors of success that students provided in their application, and then identifying what works for some students and what works for others. And then we had someone who pointed out that we cannot change the requirements per well, this works best for this student and that this works best for another, because there are legality issues around admission. And then we talked about using some predictive modeling. So Beth, let me see, Beth, I can't remember everyone who was in the room, Amy and someone else. Oh, was it Kim? If you have any other thoughts, could you please put it in the chat and share if I left anything out?
Thank you, Tanya. I think you got it all. No comments.
All right.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for either Tanya or Tom at this point? So I don't know, Tanya, if you can see this, there's a dramatic variation in the performance of engineering students at the college level. Honors students are typically among the better performing. So that's something to consider in this conversation around honors engineering versus that hierarchy that you mentioned.
Well, I guess what I'm referring to, I'm not talking about the students who make the dean's list. I'm talking about students who are coming into the college and they are going into an honors program that's been established. And I don't know always what the criteria is, but it seems to be that the more privileged students are in those honors programs. And so, and then once students are, matriculate at the university and they are demonstrating that they are, performing high, have high academic performance, they are not in that engineering honors program. And so they still may be on the dean's list, may have a 3.8, 3.9 GPA, but they're not in the honors program. But to me, that's lopsided. And I don't even know if they want to be, right? And so there's just a lot to unpack there around hierarchy, competition, privilege, which I don't think is always healthy for our community in the college. My personal opinion, it's not law, but
Anya, maybe I'll just add to that, this notion that we determine the honor students based on their record before the university, right? And so getting that honors designation as they're coming in, it is a badge for the parents that they're willing to do anything and plead for, but it really, and many times it just comes from a privilege they had before.
Yes, thank you. And Bob is saying that students see the degree without a special honors marker. So the engineering degree is as the engineering degree. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. So just as a reminder, oh, hey, PK.
Hey, I was just going to add to that. When I was at Purdue, we actually created an honors program that you brought them in from high school, but you could also matriculate in as part of your college experience. So you're really trying to support those that want to have a slightly different experience than everybody else. So I didn't want to poo-poo honors. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you.
But now I kind of feel like I have to respond to PK, right? In that, you know, I just think we had to take a look at what we are putting out there in terms of who's better than who, right? Because I just saw some of that at our university. When I'm just going to put it out there, our Gold Shirt students used to live in the honors dorm with the honors program students. And there was some good to it, but I heard a lot of like the communication that we're better than you, right? And you were remedial and you poor thing. And just this really deficit way of framing the students who were not part of the honors program, right? And so that's my lens, PK, and we can talk about that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't exist. I'm just saying like we should reimagine it. Like if it's gonna exist, how can we make it more inclusive?
I love that way of thinking.
All right. Well, I'm not saying cancel your honors program. No, I don't want anybody leaving this call saying Tanya said, right? No, like, but those are the things that I think when you have folks who are underrepresented in colleges, in the College of Engineering, you have to really work at how do we make this welcoming? And there's so many things that are already set up to not be welcoming, that creating more and more of them are just going to squeeze people, right? And we don't want that to happen.
I agree 100%.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. This was a great conversation. We'll wrap a little early again. Just a reminder, please go to the lobby and enter some feedback on the whiteboards. The whiteboard tables are labeled whiteboard feedback, and then you just click on whiteboard at the bottom of the screen. And we will keep the platform open for another at least an hour or so if people want to stick around and ask questions of each other or just talk. Bob is saying that the minimum is good enough or it wouldn't be the minimum, which is that's another conversation, I think, is the minimum standards of entry as well as graduation. And that's their conversations around that. So something to think about. And we will see you all tomorrow. Oh, yes. And everybody needs to draft a proposal by tomorrow. So just keep that in mind. We will see everyone tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow we'll have the panel on AI, data science, and machine learning in recruiting, admissions, and supporting retention, as well as a final breakout session to kind of bring everything together. So have a good evening, and I will see you all tomorrow.